Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hot Routes here on Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here. And look, Manny Hill in studio. And his head is still very large, but not quite as big, not quite as big as it looks when it's on the Zoom window or the, StreamYard is what we use. But in the window, it's not quite that big. So, Manny, great to have you here in the new studio. What do you think? I feel like the old school helmets behind us are very much up your alley.
Yeah, I was just telling you before we went on that San Diego, that old school Chargers one behind us, just reminds me of that old Arnold Schwarzenegger "Go Chargers, go" clip that Chris Berman used to play on ESPN. It's great. The Oilers one is always, you can't go wrong with the old school Houston Oilers either. That's awesome.
Yeah, I've put a lot of effort into it, and actually, a listener sent me those, so I really enjoy them. Minneapolis behind me, I feel like we're looking good. So I'm glad to have you here, and glad to be doing Hot Routes with you in person for really the first time that we have been sitting across each other and two mics doing a show since probably 2019 or
Yeah.
early 2020. It's been a long time, so I'm very excited about that. Oh, okay. Yeah, someone said the word audio in the chat. And I was like, "Wait, is audio okay?" That is the chat's job, is to make sure that the audio is going okay. And we also, Larry, we also have the game on the phone right here. So if you see both of us like going like this, that means maybe something interesting has happened with the 49ers and the Giants. So I mean, I feel like the Giants are kind of playing for their lives, which really leads us into the first topic of the show and Hot Routes is the Vikings and Chargers both at 0-2. Do you buy, Manny, that whoever loses this game, it's over for? Like, would you just create a tombstone and write Chargers or Vikings based on what happens this week?
I think it's an interesting question because typically, we've seen some teams start out 0-2 and still find a way to make the playoffs. I mean, hell, the Patriots in 2001 started 0-2 and won the whole thing.
Mhm.
So it is, it's not, you start out 0-2, it's not like your season is completely over and dead. But man, if you start 0-3 for whatever reason, and it's just the difference of one game, you start out 0-3 and it essentially is over, and everybody is in panic mode. The depending on how long your head coach has been around, he might be on the hot seat. I tend to think, in the case of the Vikings, big picture wise, an 0-3 start obviously would be very disappointing. But I can't imagine that Kevin O'Connell or Kwesi Adolfo-Mensa, for that matter, would be in much trouble from a big picture standpoint. It would be very disappointing, and you kind of wonder how this current season would end up for them. But I think overall, big picture wise, I don't think there will be as much panic um, on that front. The Chargers, though, when you consider the fact that Brandon Staley's been around for a couple of years now, that was a team that made the playoffs last year and blew a huge lead on the road to the Jaguars. Um, you start out 0-3. I mean, now you're really thinking about, okay, is Brandon Staley the right guy to be coaching this team? Some of the other players that they have on the team that are getting older, how much longer are they going to be around? So it kind of feels like if the Chargers start out 0-3, it'll be a little bit um, more of a bigger panic mode because it could signal that a lot of huge changes are coming ahead. Whereas the Vikings, I think it'd be a lot of disappointment, but I think big picture wise, I think everybody would be okay.
Well, the other thing is too that if the Vikings lose and go to 0-3, and I know all the history and how hard it is, and shout out to the 1998 Buffalo Bills who started 0-3, and then Doug Flutie got them to the playoffs. But I think out of the 5 times it's happened in the last 30 years or 40 years, 3 or 4 of them happened in the 90s. So it really does not happen in
Right.
the modern football era. And yet I would still feel like not impossible for the Vikings based on the NFC North, because a major part of that, if you go 0-3, is normally that the winner of your division wins 12, 11, 13, and kind of runs away with it. And normally, I think the conference is stronger than what it looks like it's going to be. But even if you look at, a team like Seattle They're 1-1 to start the season, probably a 9 or 10 win team. It suddenly becomes hard to get 9 wins when you start 0-3, just by a pure math perspective. But there's still a part of me that thinks, what would be the most Vikingsy thing to happen? It would be they lose this game, then they beat KC and beat San Francisco, and then all of a sudden, right? And I mean, it's a great point by Jordan here. I mean, he says the Lions started 1-6 last year, and they won the championship. Yeah, you're being sarcastic, but like they started 1-6 last year, but they almost made the playoffs. Like they were this close to making it, and they ended up 9-8. So it's not like if you get in a hole, and there's been times where teams have been. I wasn't there a Colts team that was like 1-5 or 1-4 and still made it. So I don't know about like all of those factoids. And I feel like the Vikings season is not over, but it really is for the Chargers because their division is very tough.
Yep.
I mean, if you're going to try to chase down the Chiefs, that whole conference is tough. So you're not going to get to the Chiefs if you go 0-3. But then are you even going to get to the teams that are making the wild card based on the strength? I mean, I think that's going to be a much harder ride. And I also think, what Jason says here is true. And Jason says that he's worried because this game means more to the Chargers. If they lose, Staley is going to be fired. If the Vikings lose, KOC has no chance of being fired, which is true. I guess we're going to find out how much the Chargers like their coach, because if they don't, then they could just kind of lay down a little. I'm not saying that'll happen, but will they put in the extra effort? I think they actually do. Isn't Staley a weird case? Because normally when a coach is this bad or below expectations versus the quarterback versus the roster, normally they're like a lunatic and we know they're crazy, like Urban Meyer or Matt Patricia. But with Brandon Staley, there's nothing that he's done that's been weird or crazy. They do a lot of that behind the scenes NFL film stuff. He never has some wacky quote where everyone's like, what, are you a lunatic or anything like in his background. I do wonder if it's the combination of some bad bets with the roster, like Khalil Mack's not that good anymore.
Right.
Even if he is good, he's not great. Bosa is hurt constantly. Maybe JC Jackson was never good to begin with, but had a small sample size, great season. Like, I think that there's that. Maybe combined with you don't have a quarterback who completely washes all of that away, and you end up with kind of a mediocre and middling team that lost 2 very close games and buried themselves in a big hole here.
Yeah, and you think about Staley, he comes from the Sean McVay tree, having been the defensive coordinator with the Rams for a couple of years. So he comes from a good coaching background, obviously the same coaching background that Kevin O'Connell comes from. And then you think about he's always seemed like a kind of a forward-thinking head coach. He does a lot of the, going forward on fourth down stuff that we've talked about over the years, that we want to see more coaches do more of that. And he's always been a guy that's pushed, pushed the envelope a little bit and going forward on fourth down a lot of times. And they did make the playoffs last year, and they got out to a big lead in that playoff game on the road. But then the other side of the coin is like they also blew that lead and completely fell apart. So you kind of wonder, okay, how far can this guy actually take this team? You've got a young quarterback who's one of the young studs in the league. You've got Austin Eckler, who's a very good running back. You've got a pretty good receiving core. This feels like a team that should be, at the very least, if they're not winning the AFC West, they're pushing Kansas City a little bit and kind of putting some pressure on the Chiefs and contending for that division. And they just seem to be like one step short year in and year out. The year before last, they had a chance to get into the playoffs the last week of the season against the Raiders, and they couldn't get it done. So they were on the outside looking in. So they seem like that team that they have all the things that you want, but they just, for whatever reason, they can't get over that hump. And you have to wonder if Brandon Staley, who's been the head coach now for a couple of years, you have to wonder if he's the guy that's going to be able to get them over the top.
Yeah, and they haven't had good defenses, which is really supposed to be his thing. You're
Right.
supposed to make more than what is there. And it's interesting about the fourth downs that just one of the reporters that came on earlier this week, Daniel Popper from The Athletic, was talking about how he has sort of changed his philosophy on that, which to me says a little bit of panic. Like, oh, it went wrong a couple of times and now I'm in the hot seat. And isn't it crazy how thin the margins are that shape the narratives? Like, if they close out a 27-0 lead against the Jaguars, which means one more completion by Justin Herbert in the end zone or whatever, then they are the team that overachieved.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, they went 9-8, but they had all those injuries and they had so many struggles. They had such a tough conference, but they won a playoff game and, everything else. And then the leeway would have been pretty good. But things that happen in the playoffs are just so blown up that they linger over everything and they shape the narrative, which is deserved. I mean, you blow a 27-point lead, that's on the coaching for sure. But it's just like you're that close to have been like sort of the little engine they could last year with all the injuries that they had and overcoming that. And instead, you're on the hot seat. And the same thing goes for those first two games. Like they're one play away here, one play away there from being a 2-0 team and being talked about as, hey, man, this Chargers team, I'm picking them. They're going pretty far. So, very much in Vikings fashion,
Yeah.
where there's like one thing can change the way we look at it so much. But do you feel, Manny, and I have the slate up here if you want to look at it for this week, do you feel that these two teams would rank number 1 and 2 as the most desperate football teams going into this Sunday?
I would say so. And you look at them playing each other. This is kind of a fork in the road for both of them. I mean, win or lose, I mean, could really determine how the rest of the season goes for both of these clubs. And it's hard to really see another matchup this weekend that is like that. I mean, I think, just you look at a game like New England and New York. I mean, the Jets are reeling over, still trying to get over the loss of Aaron Rodgers, and Zach Wilson, I think, showed last week that he's still Zach Wilson and he's still bad. And so that the Jets have already kind of had their pivot point of the season, it seems like. And Buffalo is still, Buffalo looks like they're getting back on track after I'm sorry, New England looks like, maybe they're going to try and get back on track after kind of keeping things tight with the Dolphins last week. So, yeah, it feels like this matchup between the Vikings and Chargers is, I think, in the eyes of a lot of people, going to be the most interesting matchup because so much of what happens in this game is really going to determine the future of the season for both of them, I think.
So I'm gonna go a little bit, maybe hot takey on another game that I think is a little bit more desperate than we would expect, and that is the Detroit Lions playing at home against Atlanta.
Mm,
So they lose their home opener in overtime against the Seattle Seahawks. Not like they played bad or anything. They got down in that game a pick six, something that Jared Goff usually doesn't do. So they have a pick six, and then Geno Smith comes through in the end. Great wide receivers on their point, but I saw today that Aaron Glenn, their defensive coordinator, was blaming himself. You're like,
mm,
uh-oh, that doesn't seem great. It doesn't seem like people are that impressed with their defense through a couple games. And remember, it wasn't that good against Mahomes in Kansas City. They kind of beat themselves in that game. And if that defense isn't good and it's mediocre, then they're a 9-8 team again. Like it's going to be the same thing we saw last year because Goff is good enough to win in the right circumstances a lot of games. But if they have a mediocre defense, then you're probably winning some and losing some with him. And they're playing an Atlanta team that can move the football, obviously on the ground. So that's going to be a challenge for them, but also a game you should probably win. Like if you're really a cream of the crop NFC team and you're at home and you're playing Atlanta, okay, like you need a win. If they go to 1-2 though, and Detroit's not used to this, people are actually going to start talking about what's going on in Detroit.
yeah.
And this is just how it snowballs in the league. I think they're going to start saying like, what the heck is going on here? Like, is Detroit not as good as we thought they were after week 1 beating Kansas City? And maybe they're going to be kind of same old Detroit-ish. They've got some pressure. I think Cincinnati's season is close to almost over.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to play Jake Browning against Los Angeles. If he somehow beats the Rams, that would be really something amazing. But, I think there's, a few teams here as well, like Cleveland after last week. I know they beat Cincinnati in week 1, but Cleveland should be desperate. If Deshaun Watson doesn't start looking like a good quarterback soon, this is one of the all-time, like, stop even talking about Herschel Walker. This is now the worst move in NFL history.
Yeah.
That's how bad Deshaun Watson looks right now.
Yeah, and when you think about, just the devastating blow of losing Nick Chubb now for the season, and he was a guy that was so productive for them over the last handful of years. And you lose him to a devastating injury like that. Deshaun Watson's not playing well. You're kind of in a desperate mode of bringing Kareem Hunt back after, him not having a good season last year and they let him go. And now it's like, hey, Kareem, we kind of need you. Come on back and try to help us out. Yeah, I mean, Kevin Stefanski, I think, obviously has a lot of pressure on him because after a really good first season where he took them to the playoffs and they went on the road and beat Pittsburgh in the first round of the playoffs, it's been it's been really challenging for them ever since then, and that was 3 years ago now. And so things have kind of changed for them, and there's a lot of pressure. If they can't win this game, this weekend, it's going to be the same sort of talk with them as it was with Detroit. Because when you think about Deshaun Watson, okay, didn't play well last year. I think, him coming back from the suspension, you give him a little bit of a break because he hadn't played, real speed football in basically 2 years at that point. So you give him a little bit of pass for last year, but now it's like, okay, Deshaun, you had a full off season, you had a full training camp, you started week 1. What's going on? It's time to get going. You get paid all of this money. They gave up all these draft picks for you. It's time to be the Deshaun Watson that we all thought you could be, that you were in Houston for a few years. And if he doesn't pick it up, then a lot of people are going to be chirping about, was this the right move for them to make? Is Kevin Stefanski on the hot seat? It's going to be a really, really challenging time for the Browns if they can't get it done this weekend.
I'll throw this out there as a slightly hot take, but of course I have to have, if you make fun of me in a funny way, put it on the screen. Jordan says the Bengals can't survive being both Matthew Coller's Super Bowl pick and signing Irv Smith Jr. Yeah, they were asking for Irv to bring injuries with him. And also every time, guys, the only time I ever took a stance against the team winning the Super Bowl, and I said, I don't think this team can really do it, was the 2021 Rams, who won the Super Bowl. So I'm not good at that. That's not that. All I know is the Vikings won't win the Super Bowl. Oh, or a reverse jinx. But no, when it comes to Cleveland, I almost think that Kevin Stefanski might be better off getting fired, because Kevin Stefanski will get another job as a head coach, I think, based on what he's done there and his reputation. But I don't know if that one's going anywhere. And after that, I mean, what do they have? They won't have cap space. This is going to be the best defense that they could build. And it's not like Zadarius Smith is young, or even Delvin Tomlinson is young. They're wasting Myles Garrett. Like it could go off the rails fast here if Deshaun Watson does not play well pretty darn soon. And what a shame. Yeah. What a shame. That's just too bad. You just hate to see it. Sometimes I think there can't be anything such as karma, right? Like that can't be a real thing. And I'm like,
of course not.
Maybe. But then if you say that, then you have to think like, well, what did the Vikings and Chargers do to deserve their fates and their history? What about Bob says Detroit still doesn't know how to be a winning team. It's a mentality that they can't comprehend. Being a front runner is way harder than being an underdog, scrappy team. So this is an interesting point, because our friend Eric Eager, remember when Cleveland, not before Deshaun Watson, when they had Baker Mayfield, so they win 11 games. And then everyone's talking about like, oh man, they can really be this next great team. Baker's taking the big step and everything. And I remember him saying that it's not that hard to have a season where you're pretty good and you get in the playoffs. It's really hard to go from that to a Super Bowl contender, to be truly one of the best teams in the league. And it's really stuck with me, because I think that's super true. I mean, even with Detroit, where it's like, we just expect if a team had a good season with some young players, that the next season they'll just be better. And I don't know if they're better. Like, they lost by 7 in overtime. So I'm not trying to overreact to a good Seattle team. But when we're talking about which teams feel like it's a must win, even if it's not by the standings, I kind of think for Detroit's mentality a little bit of like Bob said, we're supposed to be that team this year, not a team that's just riding a roller coaster. One week we're good, one week we're not.
Yeah, and when you look at the Lions and you look at the rest, you have to think about, okay, how are they looking at the rest of the division? The Packers have, moved into the Jordan Love era now. So the thought of them sort of taking a step back is probably a realistic possibility. You've got the Vikings getting off to this 0-2 start. The Lions are not stupid. They know that the Vikings have gotten off to this disappointing start. So now it's kind of like the division, the Bears are bad. They're just a mess and completely irrelevant. So now if you're the Lions, you're thinking, well, this division is right here. Like this is ours, and everybody's been talking about us and hyping us up this complete off season. And we go into Kansas City week 1 Thursday night and we take down the defending champs. This is our time. And sometimes teams start to believe their own hype a little bit too much. And to the commenter's point, maybe they're not quite ready yet. And you have to wonder, will they ever be ready yet? Is Dan Campbell the right guy? He's gotten them to this point. He's instilled a lot of confidence in them. But is he a guy that can get them over the hump, over that hump of having a lot of pressure on them? That it remains to be seen.
And I've always thought too about Detroit, and I don't know how Jameer Gibbs and Jack Campbell are going to play long term. I've always thought that if you are desperately drafting, or even not like desperate, like if you're just thinking that it's your time and you are drafting for help me out right now this year, you are making a mistake. And the Vikings did this numerous times.
Yep.
And the best example is Garrett Bradbury, who had a good season last year, but overall was not a good draft pick. And they knew they were switching to a zone running team. They needed a center. And so it was, we're going to draft this player, plug and play. You mentioned Irv Smith. AJ Brown was drafted right after that. I mean, so like Irv Smith Jr. Well, we need like this 2 tight end system because Gary Kubiak's coming in and he used to have Byron Chamberlain. And so we need this other guy. And Kyle Rudolph is going to be getting older and expensive soon. So this is what we need. And it just, those players are both NFL players and they're okay. But I think it's a lesson there that when instead of drafting the best, just taking the best player and working it out, you try to fill spots. Like they drafted Jameer Gibbs, they got rid of DeAndre Swift. Someone in Detroit is going to have to explain why they got rid of DeAndre Swift, because every time he plays the Vikings, the dude looks awesome. And he did it the other night, but he always has with Detroit. And so they move on. They say, oh, Gibbs is going to be this thing, as opposed to a wide receiver who look at now Zay Flowers and all these good receivers, or somebody else, on the defensive side where now their defense isn't that good. They still can't rush the passer super well. They still need cornerback help, which there were corners there. And you just kind of have to wonder if they thought, well, we really need this one more playmaker with Jameer Gibbs, and it's not going to work out for them. But they're 1-1. But this is just how fast it happens if they lose this week, that we start to feel like the pressure is really ramping up. Good question from Jordan. Browns versus Broncos. Who is more screwed?
Whew. Flip a coin, maybe.
I don't know. Browns. I think it's the Browns. Is the Browns more screwed? They are, right? Because I think the Broncos are an average team with their quarterback who's not good anymore. I think the Browns are a great team with their quarterback who's garbage now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, isn't that right?
Yeah, I think so. The Browns going forward, I wonder, I hope the best for Nick Chubb because he's seemed like a great dude and was a terrific player. You got to wonder how he's going to look coming back, next year from that injury. It's just such a devastating injury. And, I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to speculate, what's going to happen with him going forward. But you just don't know. You have an injury like that, it could change the course of a player's career. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes because he's been such a big part of what they've done for the last 3-4 years. And if Deshaun doesn't get it together, man, like they don't, like you mentioned, they don't have any draft picks to sort of make up for that. They're locked in. I mean, they're paying him, almost a fully guaranteed contract. So like it's not like they can just dump his salary and
Right.
go on to another guy. Like they're kind of stuck with him. I mean, the Broncos with Russell Wilson, in some ways, maybe it kind of works in their favor a little more that Russell's a little bit of an older player that, you know, 2 or 3 years from now, maybe Russ decides to just hang it up and move on. And then the Broncos can start thinking about maybe, going in a different direction at quarterback. But if this doesn't work out with Deshaun Watson, the Browns are stuck because he's still young. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. He's getting paid all that money. You don't have any draft capital, significant draft capital to sort of supplement the rest of the roster to make it even stronger to try and help boost him up even more. You are stuck with what you have with him. And if the season doesn't go well, you bring in another head coach. I mean, Lord knows how many coaches the Browns have had in the last 15, 20 years.
Is Rob Chudzinski available?
Man, I mean, Eric Mangini.
Butch Davis?
What's Eric Mangini up to these days?
Chris Palmer? Was it Chris?
I think Chris Palmer, yeah,
Chris
when
Palmer,
they first
yeah.
came back in '99,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's and Jimmy Haslam's been an owner that has kind of done things kind of recklessly, so to speak, running that franchise. So you just don't really know if you're a Browns fan right now. You're a little nervous right now because what is the future of your favorite team if this quarterback can't get it together?
And if they beat Tennessee, they'll be 2-1, and we'll probably say, "All right, I guess Deshaun Watson needs time." Isn't that funny? Like it is so incredible to me, and I forget about it because there's 7 months in between when we play football of just how intense every single week is, especially to start the season, because it really does set the stage for where every team is going. So if they go to 2-1 against Tennessee, then they feel like they're okay. But Tennessee is a heck of a defensive line, and I don't know. It looks like Deshaun Watson no longer knows how to deal with pressure. It is very, very strange to me. Joshua asks Bike's question: could our poor run defense have fooled our coaches into thinking our poor run offense was okay while practicing against each other in training
That's
camp?
well played.
I think that, well, one thing we always have to go back to is the salary cap situation in the offseason. So when we talk about why didn't they do X, Y, and Z, sometimes it's, well, where was that money going to come from? And you could argue that they should have restructured Brian O'Neill earlier. And I think you would be right. And they should have paid Dalton Reisner earlier, and they should have brought in a running back earlier. That's probably true. I think that the issue actually is that they thought that Kene Nwangwu was going to be a nice spell for Alexander Madison, and they really weren't sure about his back injury, and it's turned out to be very serious. But to me, they were not talking that way early on. They were talking like, well, actually, we think, he could be back pretty soon, and then just, not at all. And he's on IR. So I think that's part of it. I also think that they were kind of just willing to take the risk that they weren't going to have a great running game. Even the way they talked about it in training camp was not, guys, wait till you see Barry Sanders Madison. Let me tell you, Jerome the Bus Madison is going to be, and like they were saying, we just want him to fall forward and then set up play action. I mean, Kevin O'Connell and me have something in common, is that we only care about a few things. I care about football, Taco Bell, the WNBA, and chess. And like, that's it. Kevin O'Connell cares about throwing it to Jefferson, throwing it to Hawkinson, play action to throw it. Like that's
Jefferson and Hawkinson.
Jefferson, Hawkinson.
Yeah.
Drafting Addison. Like you saw him in that draft video, like, don't you trade. I got a wide receiver. Now, I think in the long run, this is actually very good because I watched their passing game on tape back and I'm like, I don't know how any defense is going to stop these concepts with these players. And that bodes really well for the passing game. But I also think that it wasn't like we're going to move heaven and earth to have a vastly better running game. They just wanted a competent running game. And there wasn't any way to have anything better than that. Who were they going to sign? What trade were they going to make? So they kind of had to go with what they had once they decided they were going to move on from Dalvin Cook. And I would say, Manny, so I don't think they got fooled. I think that they knew that this was possible, but the expectation was that it was going to be a little better than this. And they, once they saw it in action, had to go get somebody else. But I also think that it's probably going to get better. I mean, the Chargers for years have not stopped the run very well. And I think that you played two really great teams with a super banged up offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't time to decide after 2 weeks that you absolutely can never, ever, ever run the football successfully. So I think it will pick up this week.
Yeah, and I think you bring in a guy like Cam Akers. You gave up basically nothing for him. If anything, I mean, Cam Akers is not great by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, him and Alexander Madison, they're different backs, but they're in terms of like capable production, they're about the same type of guy. I mean, so you're getting two guys that can kind of hopefully play off of each other a little bit and be a little bit more productive. I don't know what happened with Cam Akers in Los Angeles. I know Sean McVay, he was asked about it and he said it was something internal. He didn't go into details or anything like that. He did go into details saying that they were openly going to move on from him right away. So you knew Cam Akers was leaving. And I think just picking him up is just like the Vikings saying, okay, let's just get another guy into that running back room. We're not going to hand the ball off to Alexander Madison 25 times a game like we were doing with Dalvin Cook in the past anyway. So let's just get another guy in here. Maybe if you have another guy that can mix things up a little bit, it can open up the running game a little bit more and have it be a little bit more productive. But like you've talked about, this is a passing team. You've got a good quarterback in Kirk Cousins. You've got the best wide receiver in the NFL in Justin Jefferson. You've got a good young wide receiver who looks like he can play. I mean, Jordan Addison looks like he's going to be a baller. And you've got TJ Hawkinson. You went and got Dalton Reisner to try and, shore things up in the pass protection a little bit, give Kirk a little bit more time in the pocket. That's where they're leaning. They're leaning into the passing game. That's their bread and butter. That's what Kevin O'Connell wants to do. And, we'll just see if the running game can just get a little bit better, a little bit more steady. And, I think mainly for the Vikings, if you want the running game to work in a situation where if you have a lead in the second half, it's relatively productive for you and you can maintain a lead and not completely fall apart and blow, a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter or something like that. That's ultimately, I think, what they're looking for by going to get a guy like Cam Akers to try and help out Alexander Madison a little bit.
Well, and Kirk Cousins said that the other day. He's like, if we're not down 27-7, then maybe we're running the ball a little more successfully, wearing down the opposing defense and so forth. And I also think that the Philadelphia Eagles are just special when it comes to their defensive line. So
They were in the Super Bowl last
year.
They
were. And then they added a freak show on the defensive line in Jalen Carter. Oh my gosh. Speaking of teams that should be absolutely losing their minds with panic, I know they came back to beat the Arizona Cardinals and had to come back to beat the Arizona Cardinals. Right now, as we speak, the New York Giants are down 17-3. It's Parcells and Bill Walsh. No, it's coach of the year, Brian Daboll from last year. I'll never understand that, but he did indeed win coach of the year. The Giants seem, to me, as one of the screwed teams because everyone thought they were going to be good after winning 9 games and a playoff game against the NFL's most atrocious defense in Minnesota. They paid Daniel Jones a truckload of money to be I like Daniel Jones, but I just said that in a way that really strongly implies I don't think he's that good. I mean, Daniel Jones is the ultimate, this guy could win you 9 games type of quarterback. And that's great if you have an unbelievable team, but they don't. Their roster didn't get that much better. Players are getting banged up. Their line isn't good. And it's just I think that they are in trouble. How are they going to build the rest of this roster? Darren Waller's not really the answer. I mean, he was good 2 years ago. And the classic move to sort of chase somebody who was good years ago, who's had all the injuries and isn't the same player. Their defense isn't that great. Man, looking down at our phone here with the game on. It's
Yeah.
17-3. It's just like that team is in trouble. And also San Francisco is super good.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's look at the Giants first, I guess 2.5 games so far. You play Dallas at home to start the season. Dallas is really good, and they kicked your ass. They just flat out embarrassed you on national TV. Then you go to week 2, you're on the road against Arizona, a maybe the one team in the league that's worse than you, and you fall down by 3 touchdowns to them. And then all of a sudden, Arizona remembers, oh, wait, we got Josh Dobbs playing quarterback. We're supposed to be bad. Let's blow this 3-touchdown lead to Daniel Jones and the Giants. And so they come back on a miracle and win that game. And now here they are again on the road playing a quality team in the San Francisco 49ers tonight. And we're seeing the same thing that we've seen from the Giants the first 2 weeks of the season, where you play a good team and you get blown out, and you play a bad team and they let you back into that game and win because they're not trying to win anyway. The Giants are just in a bad way. And Brian Dable, I think he's a good offensive mind. I think what he was able to do with that team last year was pretty remarkable, because I don't think anybody expected them to win 9 games. I thought they were going to win 5 or 6 maybe. But I think reality is sinking in. There's not a lot of weapons. Daniel Jones is still not really all that good. Saquon Barkley, their roster is kind of built around a running back, which is like cardinal sin in the NFL in 2023 now. So yeah, I mean, they're in a bad way, and they, like you said, their defense isn't that good. They've been kind of drafting on their defense, and they don't really have that high impact guy on that end yet. And you just have to kind of wonder where they're going, because like we talked about on Monday, you paid Daniel Jones. So now it's like, all right, if he's really bad and you go 6-11, 5-12, what do you do? Are you going to draft another quarterback? Well, you can't, because you just paid this guy. So it's, they're in a really tough spot.
Right. I mean, it's funny about like even trying to figure out right now who looking forward could be teams that are drafting quarterbacks. So the Vikings are obviously one of them.
Mhm.
No one would put the Giants in the list, but if it goes really bad for them, maybe they are. Certainly Chicago is in the list. I want to talk about that in a second, but let me get to some comments. I've been negligent here. Duke DeGod says saying Deshaun Watson is garbage is ridiculous. He is better than Kirk Cousins.
Not right now.
You missed one word. Was better than Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
Someone's going to have to show me when the old Deshaun Watson arrives. I mean, because that is a different player. And what we saw the other night looked nothing like Deshaun Watson from the last time he played with Houston. And maybe it comes back. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Randall Cunningham was out of football, and then in 1998 had one of the best seasons ever. It's not totally unprecedented that a quarterback could go from being good. How about Kurt Warner?
I was just going to say, Kurt Warner is one that
good,
was bad for about 4 or 5 years, and then he got to Arizona, resurrected his career. But I don't know, man.
It's totally possible that he once again becomes better than Kirk Cousins. At this moment, it's not close. Kirk Cousins is a vastly better quarterback. The way they're playing right now and really going into last season, Watson is getting sacked like crazy. I mean, he's just not playing well at all. He's not accurate. He's not leading the offense. I mean, it's wild. He looks like a completely different player. So anyway, I when we're talking about, screwed teams and so forth, I also would like to talk about teams that are not screwed, Manny, teams that might be like actually good. I want you to look at the schedule again and tell me who could win this week and make you think, okay, all right, I'm buying. I mean, I know like, the Cowboys off to a great start. Obviously, San Francisco is. Sometimes schedule will drive things like that. Some teams have gotten a loss in there that you wouldn't have expected. Is there anything on this schedule? I got one in mind that you look at and say, you know what? If this team wins, I'm in.
You know what? If the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday night at home, that would put them at 3-0. I think at that point, you look at Baker Mayfield having a lot more confidence. He's got weapons there. He's got 2 really good wide receivers in Godwin and Evans. Their offensive line seems to be holding up okay. Their defensive front is really good. Todd Bowles, I don't know how great a coach Todd Bowles is, but he always seems to have good defenses. They were a nightmare for the Vikings in week 1. If they're 3-0 in that division too, that's just kind of meh. I mean, that could be a team that if they find a way to beat the Eagles, who are obviously very good, I think that would raise some eyebrows for me for sure.
I like that pick. I'll give you the one that I thought of. The question is Washington at home against Buffalo.
Mm,
And I don't think that Washington is going to win this game. I mean, they have two uninspiring victories. One of them against, well, I shouldn't say uninspiring. They have beaten two bad teams. Denver's not that good. Arizona's not that good. But it was an inspiring victory in the way that they came back and Sam Howell played really well. They're playing at home. Their organization got rid of its horrendous owner. Ron Rivera's fighting for his job. They've got some players on that team. And if they beat Buffalo, well, then we're going to have Buffalo panicking, of course.
yeah.
We didn't mention them as a team that would freak out if they lost, but they certainly are. I think that Washington and Sam Howell could really say something interesting here. I don't think they'll win, but if they do, then kind of wow, right? The other team is New Orleans. So New Orleans is going to Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
I've been impressed enough with Jordan Love to say that they could be a playoff team. I just don't know how good they're actually going to be like by the end of the year or how good we're going to think Jordan Love is. He can clearly play in the NFL, though. That's what he's shown his last two games. He can win games with them. He can play well enough to win games. New Orleans has not been that impressive, but they've grinded out a couple of victories. And I've kind of gone with both of them. Like, just how did you win again? The what was it? Tennessee was the first one, and that was like 6-4. And then the game the other night, I was at a restaurant and just watching it on like the screen, and kept looking up, and every time something hideous happened, like this is awful. And but I do think that Derek Carr will get rolling at some point. He's been a hot and cold quarterback, much like Kirk Cousins for his career. I think that could be a pretty good statement game. And also another kind of panic-ish game for Green Bay. If they lose that, then we're going to start talking about how good are they really. And I also think that Jacksonville needs one. After last week, the way their offenses looked the first 2 weeks, like they need to get a bucket. So they're playing against the Texans, no better team to kind of help them turn it around. But I think they need that one pretty badly.
Yeah, going back to New Orleans too, I remember New Orleans was kind of my lock to win the NFC South because I'm thinking, okay, well, Carolina's going to be bad. I'm not a believer in Baker Mayfield, so Tampa Bay is probably going to be bad. And Atlanta, I just wasn't sure about. So New Orleans was kind of that team I was looking at and saying, okay, veteran quarterback, pretty good defense. They were kind of right there in the mix near the end. Weak division. That's a team that could win, 9, maybe 10 games and win that bad division. But if they don't win this weekend and Tampa Bay finds a way to win, now it's like, okay, the Buccaneers are now the team that I thought maybe New Orleans was going to be. And I'm at this point, because they haven't looked great. They're 2-0, but they haven't looked great. I'm not sure about my pick anymore with New Orleans. I don't know how good they are at this point. I don't know if Derek Carr will get it going. I think he will because he's been at least a productive quarterback in the past. But if they don't, and Tampa Bay, continues to build confidence, New Orleans might just be looking at another as one of those other teams that's just like, okay, 8 wins and they're on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I want to see really just how that offense comes together
Yeah.
because so far it clearly hasn't. But it is hard for a new quarterback to come into a new situation and thrive right away against two really good defenses. I think the Tennessee and Carolina, though they're not great teams, have good defenses. So that may have impacted how bad their offense looks. But if they go to Green Bay and they get a win there and they're 3-0, no matter what happened in those first 2 weeks for it to be ugly, that division becomes interesting. Like all of a sudden, Atlanta is kind of a competitive team, and they're getting that win against the Packers. And Bijan Robinson, of course, looks fantastic. They've got great weapons. And as you mentioned, Tampa Bay, like there's a race a brewing. And it's so funny because the South was the armpit of the league last year. And now you're looking at the North being like, is that actually going to
Right.
be, I still go back to when somebody asked if every team could go 8-9 or 9-8. I was like, yes, in the North. Yes, the answer is yes. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but the Wilfs said that they want to compete every year. So does that mean getting to the playoffs or winning the division is enough? If so, how can you blow this thing up and actually build for a Super Bowl? So the way I look at it is I don't know that in order to compete for a Super Bowl, you have to blow everything up. Now, you can. Cincinnati certainly shows us that. But the Los Angeles Rams are a good example of a team that had a lot of good players, a lot of stars, and then they felt the moment. It was like, this is the moment. Aaron Donald is in his prime. We got Jalen Ramsey. We can add Odell Beckham. Like this is the time, and we're going to go for it and take the big swing at quarterback. And that big swing was Matthew Stafford. Now, a couple teams have since tried this, and it hasn't worked out so good with Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. But that's where you want to be, right? Build the roster so you can be there for the moment when you draft the right quarterback. I mean, think about even like the Kansas City Chiefs with Mahomes.
Yep.
When they put Mahomes onto that team, they were already in the playoffs. They were already good. Like, it is a little harder to go from the middle to the top, but it's not impossible. And one of the reasons for me is because when you blow it up, what are you hoping for? You're hoping to draft some superstars.
Yep.
You already have superstars. It's really just building the complete thing, which is going to take the cap space. It's nailing the quarterback pick, which who knows? I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't see this world where you can only be great in the future if you just win 4 games this year. I don't see that. Like I think when you have the foundation that they have, and I think of like an Atlanta team. Remember that Atlanta went through that kind of dip before coming back up and going to the Super Bowl? There's some similarities there where they had Grady Jarrett, they had Julio Jones, like some legit superstar players, and then they got more of a complete roster. Kyle Shanahan was their offensive coordinator. That helped. MVP level quarterback in Matt Ryan. But I mean, I just think that like the idea that you have to be complete trash. And sometimes the other part about that is if you look at the Bears, if you want to talk about the Bears for a couple minutes, you look at the Bears. One of the problems with tanking and being complete trash is that it's miserable and it causes everybody to freak out. And it can be really hard to work your way through because everyone is panicking and everyone is upset and people are talking about getting fired and quarterbacks are busts and you're wasting people's careers. And like, yes, technically it is a better route to get back to the top, getting a top quarterback and profit. And even like, let's not act like it was just the Bengals. The Miami Dolphins,
Yeah.
Brian Flores, they fired him because he wouldn't tank enough, and they still got a really good quarterback. The Chargers should have been a great team with Justin Herbert. They had to lose a ton to get there, which may end up being how this Viking season goes. Remember the Phil Rivers, like his final season in with the Chargers, where it just kind of naturally came apart.
Mhm.
That could happen. But I think that comes along being that bad with so much misery that it's not the worst thing in the world when you're trying to also have a good culture and a good coach. You're trying to keep that good coach and not have him lose his mind to remain competitive and in the race. That's not me arguing for it and the direction. I would have tanked that before last year, but I understand where they're coming from, where it's a needle I think that you can thread.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the past with this franchise, talking about the Vikings for a minute, and I know it was a different regime, different head coach and everything, but you'd look at the way in 2009 when they went and got Brett Favre in the offseason, they had everything else. They had young, talented receivers. They had a superstar running back. They had really good veteran players on defense who were kind of in their prime. Jared Allen and the Williams Wall and those guys, Antoine Winfield, guys that were at the peak of their power, so to speak, at that point in their careers. And they were, 2 plays from going to the Super Bowl that year. So there's a lot of different avenues that you can go. To me, ultimately, it just comes down to the quarterback. I mean, you've got to have, if you're going to go get a veteran guy, if that's the route you're going to go, if you're going to go the '09 Vikings route, if you're going to go the 2021 Rams route, you got to nail that guy. That guy's got to be, he's got to be it. He's got to be the difference maker for you. If you're going to go with the young quarterback route, you've got to nail that too. I mean, the Chiefs nailed it with Patrick Mahomes. They absolutely did. He's the greatest player in the world now. And then you look at the case like the Chicago Bears. I mean, Justin Fields, man, he's a mess right now. And if Justin Fields were living up, I think, to the expectations that he had coming out of Ohio State, the Bears, you probably feel a lot better about the Chicago Bears right now, even if they were, going to be like a 500 team this year. If he was playing really well and living up to the hype, you'd feel a lot better about the Bears with the weapons that they went and got him in the offseason. You'd feel like, okay, we still have an opportunity to sort of build up that defense and get them a little bit better. Our trajectory is going upward. But the fact that he's not good right now and he's calling out coaches and then backing out of it a couple of hours later, they're a mess right now. And now you're talking about them possibly going in another direction at quarterback again, trying it again in the offseason with the draft capital that they have.
Right. And that's the hard part is when, let's say, like, you're the New York Jets and they didn't necessarily tank, but they were just bad. Like they weren't trying to lose, they just did because they had Sam Darnold. But along the way of being bad, they built up a lot of star players, right? And so similarly to the Vikings, where they have Quinnen Williams, they have Garrett Wilson, the Vikings have Jefferson, they have Darisaw, and they didn't have to tank to get those players. They had to get dumbass lucky to get Jefferson just pure luck.
Yep.
Jalen Rager, folks. I mean, you just had to be lucky. And even like trading up for Vera Tucker, the Jets, and leaving Darisaw there for the Vikings. I mean, a lot of draft luck, but it worked out for them to get the stars. So now you feel like if you're the Jets, that it's not hopeless no matter how it looks at the quarterback position. I don't mean for this year. I just mean for the long run, because you have these superstar players that you've got a window that you're going to continue to have good rosters to build around, and you just have to find the right quarterback fit. Where if you tank, and I'm not trying to be anti-tank. I'm not trying to say the Bears won't draft Caleb Williams and be great. Like, they brought back Peterman today, I think. So like they might use him to tank and get them to the bottom again. But it's just that it takes such a long time to get those star players in place and everything else. The Cincinnati Bengals had to tank for Burrow. They had to fall apart before that. They had to have a horrible season with Burrow. And then finally, here's Jamar Chase. It takes a long time. So the Vikings are a little bit ahead in that process. And also, I was looking and I made a list of where all the quarterbacks who are good in the league were drafted. And yes, several of them were number one overall. So that does happen. Trevor Lawrence, that does happen. But at the same time, there are a lot of quarterbacks who were 5th, 7th, 10th, 12th, third round. I don't like endorse the third round idea, but you know what I mean? Like it's not always the first quarterback. So anyways, we talk about kind of the comparison of Vikings Bears. The Bears have this jump on the Vikings in the way that they've gone all the way to the bottom. The cap space will be there. And if they're horrible this year, they get Williams, they get Drake May, they get another shot at it. And that could make them jump to the moon very quickly. But if they don't finish that bad and they don't get that top quarterback and they've just put themselves through hell and they're in a horrible position, like it's not that easy. So, there's no easy button in football ever. Everything is hard to get to the top. But the Vikings have a lot of the hard part done, which is that they have, they've got those star players in place. So I just wanted to make that little comparison there. Isn't it funny though, also, Manny, how we prep stuff, but then the chat is always so like good at being the chat and has interesting and fun things to say. I was going to ask you what you thought, which team in the NFL should have the biggest regret over something they did this offseason. And maybe this is also Chicago. Let's throw out Chicago. Let's just make that a Chicago talking point, because maybe the biggest regret was not just taking Anthony Richardson number one overall. Other than that, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I have a pizza read. I have a pizza ad read.
Let's do it.
Hold on, everyone. Got to tell you about pizza. And it's actually wonderful. You have to make little no, you should. I demand that you make Little Caesars, the official pizza sponsor of the NFL, part of your game day. It's not a tough ask. Make pizza part of your game day. Order online during their Pizza pregame, 1 hour before NFL games, and get ready for some football and fun with football, Manny, depending on how things go. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza and pick up any toppings you crave. Either way, you're going to win, even if your team does not. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery or their in-store pizza portal pickup. So grab some friends, enjoy a few slices during the tastiest hour before kickoff. Okay, now teams who should have regrets. You want to look at the teams? There's the teams.
Oh, no, this was an easy answer for me. It's we talked about them already. The New York Giants giving Daniel Jones that money. I just don't. It's so weird to me that he goes. Okay, he comes into U.S. Bank Stadium. He torches the Vikings, the worst defense in the league. They win that playoff game. Okay, I can understand how you could see that and think, okay, well, hey, maybe Daniel Jones, maybe he's like Eli Manning, where he's just not really that good in the regular season, but you get him on a playoff stage and maybe he just turns it up a notch. But then the following week, he goes into Philadelphia and we see the real Daniel Jones, and they still paid him after that. Just mind-boggling to me. And this is not me saying that they should have given Saquon Barkley the big contract either, because I just don't think you do that for running backs anymore in today's NFL. But I think to just give him that money when he hadn't given you any real reason to do that, I thought was just mind-boggling to me, and I still can't believe they did that, and they're paying for it. I mean, that team is bad. They're just not good, and you have to wonder if it's going to end up costing Brian Dable his job down the line, because he's only going to be able to get so much out of this guy, and it's just not going to be enough to keep him around.
So it would be the hottest take to say, do you think that Carolina already regrets picking Bryce Young? Because CJ Stroud, I know it's been miserable, but he's looked like an NFL quarterback. And Anthony Richardson, I know he's banged up because of the concussion, just fell wrong, has really looked in command. And Bryce Young not only has looked horrendous, but he's already hurt. And the biggest concern is the guy's size and whether he could
Yeah.
stay healthy, which is very reasonable. How many NFL quarterbacks ever have been Bryce Young's size? And you went, oh, we're going to go with the outlier as opposed to the physical freak, and that's the guy we want. And he looks a little lost. Not calling him a bust yet, nowhere close, probably 3 years. I just wonder if there's someone in the Carolina front office who was writing up quarterback reports months ago and is just going, I knew it. I knew it. I knew it wasn't going to look great. So I do wonder about that. I wouldn't say like for sure. I also wonder if the Raiders regret not being the ones who traded up to take one of the quarterbacks and instead went with Jimmy Garoppolo and wasted everyone's time because they're going to go 6-11 again. And I don't know if Josh McDaniels is getting fired, but it's probably just not a great situation for them. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of regrets to go around. Of course, the Jets would go back in time and not get Aaron Rodgers. So I think it's more of a like foreseeable. Maybe should have gone this other way. And I also think about Detroit in that draft that I referenced earlier. Like, would they draft a receiver at this point? Because Amon-Ra St. Brown has been banged up a little bit. I think Josh Reynolds is underrated, but I mean, if you added Jordan Addison to that team, or if you added Zay Flowers to that team, as opposed to a running back, I don't know.
I got a question for you in regards to Bryce Young, because we've seen, especially in recent years, we've seen so many of these young quarterbacks get thrown out there right away. We're seeing Anthony Richardson get out there early on, CJ Stroud, same thing. But sometimes I wonder if some of these guys should be sitting to start out. And I wonder if Bryce Young is one of those guys. And the reason why I ask with him specifically is I think so much of his success at Alabama, obviously, aside from having just a lot of really talented players around him, but he was always kind of a guy that played on instinct as well. And Nick Saban even talked about that a lot in post-game press conferences when people would ask him, well, what makes Bryce so good? And he would always say, well, Bryce is a very instinctive player, which I think is really good for that position. But sometimes I wonder if guys that have so much of their success based on instinct, if they're the guys that get to the next level and they need to just sit behind a guy for a year, watch and learn like, okay, Bryce, you made this play in the SEC because it's the collegiate level and this worked. It's not going to work in the NFL. Sit back and watch on, what you should do in these type of situations. I just wonder if that's maybe what's happening with him. I mean, aside from his size and durability concerns and everything, if he's just a guy that maybe shouldn't be playing right now and he should be sitting behind, a veteran player. I don't know who their backup is in Carolina, but like
Andy Dalton,
Andy
baby.
Dalton. Well, you know what? He's a guy that you could just say like Andy Dalton started a lot of games in this league. I wonder if he should just be playing right now and Bryce should be sitting and watching.
I also wonder if it's a fake injury. Like, I wonder if they were like, "Oh, Bryce Young's hurt," when really it's Bryce Young's benched because he looks like he can't play.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually worse for the Vikings because the Panthers have a lot of talent on defense, and Andy Dalton has beat them before, like
A few times,
with
yeah.
Dallas. I mean, so I wonder if this is a quiet benching, sort of like when a major league team needs to send a pitcher somewhere, but they don't have an option, and they'll be like, quad. Dude's quad. Like, who's going to question him? Who's going to be like,
His
"Oh,
arm's tired.
or let me look at your quad." Like,
Yeah.
no one's going to question that. Is he really hurt? I don't know, maybe. But to your point, I've always been a big believer in it. But I think one of the biggest problems is that owners are usually hugely involved in drafting quarterbacks,
Yep.
and they get very excited and they want to see that quarterback play right away. That's the one my GM convinced me on, or I watched and I loved and everything else. And let's play the guy. Let's see him. I want to see him. I just drafted him. I'm excited. But I don't think it's any coincidence that Jordan Love looks like an NFL player. I really don't. I mean, sure, yeah, sometimes a guy sits and still stinks, but I mean, Jordan Love looks very comfortable when he's not QB sneaking and falling down, very comfortable as an NFL quarterback. I don't know how great he'll be, but I've got to think years of development help. People have tried to argue to me about this and say, well, you got to use that year of the rookie contract to do what? Win 4 games and destroy the man's confidence? Like, I don't know. I've never really bought into that. So
The greatest quarterback in the league right now sat for a whole year behind Alex Smith, and it didn't it didn't do anything negatively for his career. If anything, it may have even helped him. And he's talked about that, about how much of a huge help Alex Smith was for him starting that year ahead of him.
And if the Vikings next year were to draft a quarterback and get a good veteran to start, I would want them to sit the guy because I think Kevin O'Connell's offense is not super easy to run, and they probably won't sit him and he'll go through some stuff. But at least this is the difference, though. At least you can give him Jefferson. At least you can give him a left tackle. I think that's a big deal for confidence. So it all depends on the situation. If it's a guy stepping into a great situation, then okay, maybe that's like the right thing to do. But even, Jalen Hurts didn't play right away, right? And
Mhm.
I think a lot of good quarterbacks are like that. Let's quick run through some of the comments, and before we wrap up here, Delton says, "How does everyone feel about our young secondary? Not bad, not bad. I mean,
All right.
Caleb Evans, there was a clear miscommunication. I think he's done fine. Otherwise, Mekhi Blackman's been okay. I think Byron Murphy's good. I think he can really play. So I'm
Their
feeling,
problem in Philadelphia, they couldn't stop the run.
yeah,
I mean, the pass defense was okay. I mean, it wasn't nothing to write home about, but it was all right. It wasn't as bad as I think a lot of people. These first 2 games, it wasn't as bad as I think a lot of people anticipated it would be.
I always hate phrasing things this way, but if not for the 250-yard passes, but for like on a play-to-play basis, I thought they were pretty good. But they really were playing like a lot of guys deep on a lot of those passing downs. But I think that they've been pretty solid so far. I think actually Cam Bynum's had a great start to the season, and he might be one of those guys that we didn't think much of last year and then develops into kind of a dude. Uh, let's see. Purple Purgatory says, without a real replacement in place, trading Kirk equals 2, 4, or 5 wins. The Wilfs won't have it. That might be true, but if you already are en route to 2 or 5 wins, what are you going to do, right?
And Kirk is 35. He's not going to play forever. At some point, you're going to have a new quarterback. It's inevitable.
Right.
Father time, as Charles Barkley always says, undefeated.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I also think, like, I mean, if you're talking about this year trading him away, like then you're already almost there. If you're trading him away, you're already going to win 5 games, like because your season has gone off the rails. And if you mean next year, I'm not convinced of that. Like I think that they have a good enough team to put in a rookie and be competitive, or a good enough team to attract a disgruntled Kyler Murray or whoever, or a good enough team to pick up somebody else who's available and pair him with a young quarterback. I mean, the Ryan Tannehill type of situation. Like, I don't think that moving on from Kirk guarantees that you're bad. I don't think, and this is a hot take, that Kirk Cousins is the only man on the planet who can pick up a pigskin and heave it toward Justin Jefferson. I think there are other people. Anthony says the Vikings need to find themselves a Jalen Carter, Dexter Lawrence, Jeffrey Simmons, Chris Jones. How about all of them?
Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Try drafting one ever. There you go. I mean, truly, like when I watched those joint practices and looked at Jeffrey Simmons, I was just like, this is a different universe from what the Vikings have. And where did this go? Like when they had Linval Joseph, it was just such a difference maker. I have always been the biggest believer in the big guys, and all Vikings fans should be anyway, because they saw the Williams wall. They saw what that did to opposing offenses.
And they've seen what guys like that have done to the Vikings over the years. Akeem Hicks, for example, who have just been so disruptive and made it hard for them over the years.
Yeah. Delton says Bryce Young has no one to get separation. Again, strong agree. I mean,
which is another reason why he probably should be sitting right now.
Yeah, that's completely true. And that team is bad on offense, extremely, extremely bad. And it's probably better to just let him learn. Jordan says, just like when Andy Dalton played the Vikings last year as a backup, a double doink away. But you're right. Wasn't it funny last year when Andy Dalton got put in for Jameis Winston? I was like, I think that's actually better for New Orleans, and it's way better for Carolina. So maybe it's less of an auto win. I don't know. So anyway, man, this was great. I'm glad you could come over and stop by.
Fun to be in studio with you, man.
Maybe we should get some Little Caesars pizza.
I'd take that.
Watch football. Well, I don't know. Has the game gotten bad? My phone was about to die as they were. No, it's still 17-6. We got a game. We got a game.
All right.
Anyway, well, it's gonna be fun, folks. This game, Vikings Chargers. Can we get a little prediction? I mean, I know I made you give like a hilarious prediction earlier of like a tie. Give me, before we wrap, just give me the real one. How do you think it's gonna play out?
I think the Vikings coming back home, I think they'll find a way to get it done. I do think it's going to be a crazy game. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored because I think both offenses are so talented. I think the Vikings are going to find a way to win this game. But it's not going to be easy because you've got a young quarterback in Justin Herbert who's really good, and he's got weapons to throw to. And, he seems like he's healthy, and that was kind of their problem last year was he played through a pretty significant, I think it was like a sternum injury or something like that he was dealing with through most of the year. So he seems like he's healthy now. It's going to be tough, but I think the Vikings being at home, having sort of that mini bye because they played Philadelphia on that Thursday, I think will work in their favor and they'll come away with a win.
Okay. I think John Carney comes in and misses a field goal at the end, and the Vikings win 38-35 or something. It'll be fun. So anyway, I appreciate everybody watching. Chat, you guys are always awesome. And Manny and I are doing this all year, Monday nights, Thursday nights, so you can watch football, turn on the TV, watch us, and we'll have a lot of fun. So we'll see y'all later. Football.